Greetings, Jerry Ultimate Power Gamer coming at you today with my second tactics video. You know, whether you're attending a tournament or you're playing a scenario from the Clash of Kings book, or you and some of your friends get together and decide on an impromptu made-up scenario, the one important thing you need to do is know how to play the scenario. With that in mind, I'm going to tell you my #1 rule to knowing how to play the scenario. You ready? Know what the victory conditions are. Okay? The most important thing is to know what the victory conditions are, because knowing that helps you decide how to set your army up. There's nothing worse, or there would be nothing worse in a game for, like, let's say you to be playing the dominate scenario, which the victory condition is to control the center of the table, and you decide to take the majority of your army and chase after some your opponent's chaff out on a flank someplace. So, ooh, you get the chaff or you get whatever you're going after, but you end up not getting any scoring units, so you lose the game. That would suck. Okay, the second rule of knowing how to play the scenario is, you ready for this? It's an easy one. Here we go. Control the battlefield. Okay? If you can control the battlefield where the majority of the victory conditions are, you're going to be more likely to win the scenario. Now, see tactics video #1, where to locate your house, because that plays into here. We're going to go over now on page 66. Let me get the book. Clash of Kings book, page 60. They've got some definitions. I'm going to go a quick summary over a couple of those. First of all is victory points. Victory points is what determines whether or not you win or lose the game. If you have more victory points or victory conditions than your opponent does, you win. If you and your opponent have the same number of victory points or victory conditions, the game will end up being a draw. Okay? Next, they have a table on unit strength, and they talk about scoring units and not scoring units. So we're going to make this real easy. On that table, I'm going to read it off real quick. Individual and war engines have 0 unit strength. Pause for the cause real quick. If your unit does not have a unit strength greater than zero, it counts as a non-scoring unit, so that means it can't hold objectives, it can't do a lot of stuff. But don't worry about that, because non-scoring units have a tactical role to play. We'll talk about that in a minute also. But then going on, unit strength 1, if you have a troop, heroes without the individual special rule, monsters, or any height 0 units, those are going to count as unit strength 1. Regiments count as unit strength 2. Hordes or legions count as unit strength 3. Now, quick caveat to that, if you have a flying unit, the flying unit counts as 1 unit strength less than what it actually is, down to a minimum of 1. So if you have a flying horde, it's going to actually count as unit strength 2 instead of unit strength 3. Flying regiment, unit strength 1 instead of unit strength 2. Okay, with that, I'm going to do a quick breakdown here. When we come to the actual scenarios, there's 12 of them. I basically break them down into 3 categories. We have the objectives. The objectives include pillage, ransack, occupy, take, and hold. We have token-based scenarios. That's loot and scavenge. And then we have area or land grab scenarios. Those are dominate, control, invade, secure the field, eliminate, and push. I'm going to go over each one of those here in just a minute. I've got some pictures, so I'll be right back and we're going to go over that. Okay, so our first category we're going to go over is going to be objectives. Okay, so objective markers are basically 25 millimeter in diameter. That's what the Clash of Kings book recommends them being. So some placement restrictions. Okay, well, #1, an objective marker has to be at least 3 inches away from blocking terrain. Just a FYI, this includes the table edge. The table edge counts as blocking terrain, so that means if you place an objective marker, it has to be at least 3 inches away from a table edge. Okay, let's see. In the picture that you see here, the purple die in the center of the table, that represents the center of the table, and because the person wanted to place a pillage token right there close to the center, couldn't hit the center, so he had to place it 3 inches, so the token is shifted a little bit there to the right. Okay. The next restriction for placement of an objective marker is it has to be at least 12 inches away from any other objective markers. So those are the restrictions. Now you want to ask, maybe, how do you control an objective marker? Well, in order to control an objective marker, you have to have the highest total unit strength within 3 inches of that objective marker. Okay, so now this picture represents a pillage scenario layout. Now in pillage, you have D3 plus 4 tokens. In this picture, we have the maximum of 7. Okay, and as you can see, as the players were taking turn placing the objective markers down, on the right side of your screen, we have a grouping of 4. Now, grouping of 4 versus the left side of the screen where there's a grouping of 3. So if you're going to sit down, depending on which half of the table you got, and actually regardless of which half of the table you got, you would probably want to set up to try to take these 4 objective markers because they're all close together. It might be easier for you to get all of those. Now, as far as the 3 objective markers on the left-hand side of your screen, if you happen to have a, say, fast, nimble chaff or a flying monster, something that you could maybe later on turns of the game make a quick dash over to grab one of those just in case you needed it because maybe the fight in the right flank there, right side of your screen, is a little bit too tight on unit strength. You could always do that. But the main thing you want to concentrate on is making sure you have a higher unit strength than your opponent. Also, when you're placing down tokens or objective markers, you want to possibly try to place one close to the center of the table, because then as you start to place the other objective markers down, you can kind of control where you're going to set up to locate your house and locate the area of the battlefield you want to fight for. Now in pillage, you actually place the tokens before you roll for table sides, so you don't necessarily want to place tokens in a deployment zone, because if you lose the die roll and you don't get to pick that deployment zone, you're going to kind of be out of luck. So that is going to be pillage. We're going to go over next here, ransack. Okay, so this is basically the same layout as the pillage. This is going to be for if we were playing ransack, the ransack scenario. Now, if you notice here, we've got some different colored objective markers down, and the reason that is because in ransack you have one objective marker which is located in the center of the table. That one's worth 3 victory points, and then each player has one objective marker that's worth 2 victory points and 2 objective markers worth 1 victory point. So it's best to find some way to be able to tell how which one of these objective markers are which. So in my group, when we play, we use the different colored markers just to make it easy to keep track of. Now, the red objective marker, to go over once again, in this case, it has to be placed in the center of the table, and so it is offset from the center so that it can be 3 inches away from that blocking terrain there. Basically, this is the same as pillage. You're going to be placing in such a way that you can make the best use of grabbing objective markers. Now here, on the right hand side, we've got the 3-point objective marker and we've got the 2-point objective marker. So if somebody was pushing hard here, they could get those, but on the left side of the screen, we have a 2 and 2 1s, so it might be possible, you know, if you had a say a nimble or a flying monster that could get to like that second 2 position, or just to grab another 1 position, that would be very helpful to keep you going. So for playing ransack, what you want to do, basically for any of the objectives, keep this in mind, because I'm going to probably repeat this when I go over the other objective scenarios. But anytime you're playing a objective scenario, you want to try to group the objectives together so that you can go after them to make it easier for you to get to, once again, where to locate your house, and harder for your opponent to get to. So that takes care of Ransack. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the Occupy scenario. Now, Occupy, you have 5 tokens, and the way this works is you place a token in the very center of the table. You see that there. And then you roll off. Each player places another token, which is a secondary token, but that has to be located. There's a band 6 inches from the center line, and what you do is you place that on your opponent's half of the table, but it has to be within 6 inches of the center line. So those orange tokens, all those orange tokens are going to represent the secondary objectives here. Next thing you do is each player takes it in turn in placing a primary objective. Now the primary objectives in this particular case are red. Those are also placed on your opponent's half of the table, but they have to be within 9 inches of the center line. Now, in addition to those basic rules for this scenario, we also have to keep in mind the other rules, meaning objective markers can't be any closer than 12 inches, and objective markers can't be any closer than 3 inches to any blocking terrain. Victory conditions for this game. Basically, those orange tokens, or the secondary objectives, both players are trying to get those, and whoever controls those gets 1 victory point. The red, or the primary objective marker here that's located in your opponent's half of the table, if you control that one, it's worth 2 victory points to you. The primary objective that's in your own half of the table doesn't count for you at all. So in that particular instance, you would be trying to get to your opponent's half of the table to get the primary, while at the same time keeping them from getting to yours. Now, I'm going to take this time to speak about those non-scoring units, because in a case like this, you could use an individual or a war machine to try to block out a unit from getting to that objective marker. So keep that in mind. In this particular instance, just like all the objective scenarios for that category, you're trying to grab as many as you can. In this particular instance, both secondary objectives are placed close together. Okay, so the person that's on the side of the screen, the lower part of the screen, they have a really big chance of getting to secondary objectives, but the primary objective, it's all the way on the opposite side of the table, so they'd be at a little bit of a disadvantage. Whereas a person at the top of the screen, the 3 secondary objectives are right there, and their primary objective, they could easily come up and over that hill and make it easier for them to get that. So that's the Ransack scenario. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the take and hold scenario. In this one, you have 3 objective markers. 1 objective marker is placed in the center of the table, and then both players roll off to see who places theirs first. The objective marker is placed in their opponent's half of the table. It could be anywhere in their opponent's half of the table. And then you roll for sides. Now, take and hold is a little different in that you don't actually start, you can't actually start scoring victory points for holding an objective until turn 3. And then once turn 3, at the end of turn 3 for each player and going up, your victory points for being able to control one of those objective markers, it's cumulative. So if you were controlling 1 objective marker, let's say the objective marker on the left-hand side of the screen, this player, let's say he went first, and he's controlling that at the end of turn 3. Well, at the end of his turn 4, if he still had that controlled and his opponent didn't contest it, he'd get a second victory point, and then turn 5, a third, and so on. There is one more thing I wanted to add in with this take and hold scenario, and with the objective scenarios altogether anyway. Keep in mind, in this particular picture, you see at the token on the right-hand side of the screen that's just in front of that tower, whenever you place an objective marker down, if you place it in such a way that your opponent, to make it more difficult for them to get to, like let's say for this particular case, with that objective marker being in front of the tower, the person who was on the lower hand side of the screen or the side or of the table opposite that tower, his opponent then has a harder chance, or has a harder time if he gets the first turn, of being able to get within 3 inches of that objective marker because the building's in the way. So keep that in mind. When you place objective markers down, if you could put it in such a way that it hampers your opponent, that would be great. Now, on the flip of that, because you place these tokens before you choose sides, if you were the one who ended up not getting that side, well, you know, you're at a disadvantage, but you could play hard for the other 2 tokens instead of that 1. So just wanted to add that in. We'll be back in just a moment with our next one. Okay, so now our second category is going to be the tokens. Tokens have the same placement restrictions as objective markers. You also have, it's a 25 millimeter diameter token. In addition, whenever you're playing a token scenario, all your tokens are placed along the center line. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about for tokens is going to be loot. Okay, loot, you place the tokens before you roll off for sides. So what it is you place 1 token in the very center of the table, then each opponent rolls, or then the opponents roll off, and they take it in turns placing a token down on that center line. Once again, you're using the same placement restrictions. In this picture, the 2 players have put the tokens on the extreme ends, and that's fine. So let's talk about real quick the how do you pick up a loot token. The way you pick up a loot token is you end your move touching or on top of that token. Now that does not include a vanguard. If you happen to get a vanguard move, you cannot then, when it's your, or at the end of the vanguard move, you can't go, oh, I'm gonna pick it up right now. Can't do that until it's actually your turn. So to pick up a loot token, a unit just has to move and touch that loot token, and once they do, at the end of their move, you can pick up and place that loot token on the unit. Okay. Now, a unit carrying a loot token, there's a few little restrictions that it's going to be hampered by. First of all, it's going to have its speed reduced to 5, or if the speed was less than 5, the speed is what it is. Now, just because your speed is 5, you can still make an at the double, so that means you can actually still move 10 inches if you make an at the double move. Also, if you're carrying a loot token, you are not able to fly, and you lose the nimble special rule as long as you have that loot token. In addition, a unit carrying a loot token cannot be surged and cannot be wind blasted. Okay, so those are some of the restrictions. To go on more like that, if a unit carrying a loot token is routed by, like, let's say, shooting, what you do is you take the you remove the unit, but you leave the loot token located within the footprint of that unit. Okay, if a unit is routed in melee while it's carrying a loot token, the enemy that routed that unit gets to take that loot token. Okay, dropping a loot token. You drop a loot token at the beginning of your move before you do anything else. To drop a loot token, you just place the token along the edge of the unit that was carrying it, and then you go ahead and move that unit as normal. One more thing on picking up loot tokens. Basically what you're going to do is anytime you end your movement, any type of movement, so like let's say you made a normal move or an at the double move, or you charged and you ended your charge move in such a way that you were either on top of a loot token or you were touching a loot token, you can pick it up. However, the little caveat to that is if your opponent has a unit that is also touching that loot token, you cannot pick it up, period. So that is a way that you could use that non-scoring unit. You can have an individual sit on top of a loot token or touch a loot token, or a war machine, and that would stop your opponent from being able to pick that up. In addition to that, picking up loot tokens. Let's say at the end of a melee combat in which you routed your opponent, you roll a d6, and a d3 for that matter to go backwards. You're able to go forward or move backwards and touch or end up moving on top of that token. You can pick it up there. Or if at the end of the combat you decide to pivot, and by pivoting you're able to make contact with that loot token and there's not an opponent on top of it, you can pick it up. So those are the rules for picking up and how to do loot tokens. Okay, so in this second picture here, this is also a loot scenario setup, but what ended up happening is both players put their loot tokens within the same flank. Now, doing this, both players would potentially put their locate their houses right over here close, and they would basically be duking it out. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you have a very high melee, strong, elite army, and you're able to do like this, if you can control this portion of the table, it puts you at a better, you're at a bigger advantage of being able to beat your opponent. Keep in mind, to win a loot scenario, you have to have control, not just have control, you have to actually have ownership of that token, which means you have to have it, and you have to have had picked up that token. And at the end of the game, you have to have the token. Now, in the loot scenario, a unit is allowed to have more than one token on it. So one unit could potentially have all three, but when you're playing loot, don't get greedy. You only need to have one more token than your opponent to win. So keep that in mind. So that's it for the loot scenario. Okay, so we're back to the first loot picture here. We're going to be talking about the scavenge scenario. Now, scavenge is exactly the same as loot, so keep those things in mind. I'm not going to show the second picture, but it plays exactly the same with the following differences. First of all, these three tokens actually count as objective markers. So you place them exactly the same as you did for loot. What happens is, in order to claim one of these markers, a unit at the start of their turn, if they control one of the markers, they can scavenge it and it becomes a loot token. Now, in this particular instance, if you happen to have a unit that was able to vanguard and you were able to vanguard within 3 inches of it, because remember, 3 inches is the distance. You have to have a higher unit strength than your opponent within 3 inches of the actual objective marker. If you do that at the start of your turn, you would then be able to change that objective marker into a loot token and put it on that unit. Okay? So other than that, all the rules play exactly the same, except for if a unit routes a unit that is holding a scavenged loot token, instead of claiming that token, they can decide to destroy that token. So there you go. Now, you might ask, why would you want to destroy that token? Well, if you destroyed that token, if you control 2 of the objectives or the scavenged loot tokens, and you were able to make sure your opponent could not get to either of those, you ensure that either you win the game or the game is going to be a draw. That's just the one little quick caveat of scavenge. As I said, other than that, it's exactly the same as loot. Okay, now for our third and final category of scenario, the area. Okay, in this picture, we're basically showing a table set up for a dominate. Now, the area scenarios really make use of the second rule, that is, controlling an area of the battlefield. Now, dominate, the way that works, we're still using the purple die, and the circle is supposed to be based around the center of the table, and it's still basically the same as it was. You're doing the center of the table, and basically it's a 12-inch radius from the center of the table. That's what those circles are around. And at the end of the game, whoever has the highest combined unit strength within that circle wins. Now, a unit does not have to be completely in the circle, but you do have to have the majority of your base. That will be 51% for you, those of you who like math. 51% of your base of a unit has to be inside that circle in order to count. Now, based on how this table is set up, and depending on what type of army you're playing, it looks like the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or this half of the table, would be the easiest one. That would be the side of the table you'd want, because you have a better clear walk into getting into the zone. Whereas if you're on the other side of the table, well, technically on the other side of the table, you have about the same coming in, except you've got a obstacle and a building that are sitting right there. More of the table seems to be open up if you're coming in from the lower side of your screen coming up. So that basically is how we would do the dominate scenario. Okay, so I'm back to the loot picture, because basically this can be used for to describe all of our last, or the majority of our last few scenarios in this category. Okay, so next we're going to be talking about control. Control, the way that works is you divide the table up into 2x2 sections. Okay, you roll off to pick sides as normal, and the way you score is each 2x2 section, a unit can only control one 2x2 section. So whoever has the highest unit strength in each 2x2 section, they get to count that as theirs, and so each section is worth 1 victory point. Now, the center section, which is the the center section of each center 2-foot section, counts differently. The one in your opponent's table half, the center section, is worth 2 victory points for you instead of 1 victory point. So you can see, and vice versa, your opponent's, your center section is worth 2 victory points to them and only 1 for you. Now, you can see here with this, it really is a good thing to be able to, if you can control your opponent's center section. Now, also though, you have 6 table sections, each worth, or excuse me, you have 5 table sections that are worth 1. Even if your opponent gets your center section, or you can't get their center section, if you can control the other, you can beat them. So if you can control the 2-point section, woohoo, kudos to you, but that's not necessarily something you have to do in order to win the game. Okay, we're going to use this same picture now, and we're going to go ahead and talk about the invade scenario. Invade scenario, basically you're going to set up, in order to win that one, you have to have a higher unit strength on your opponent's half of the table. Now that means the unit has to be completely over the center line, 100% on your opponent's half of the table. So at the end of the game, you add up all your unit strength that's completely on your opponent's half of the table. And if you have a higher unit strength total, you win. Just like with the control scenario before in dominate, where you put your house here is going to be really important. In this particular instance, the lower part of your screen, either one of those works out well, because you have a lot of clear open lanes to move across the table without a lot of difficult terrain getting in your way to slow you down. Now, if you happen to play an army that has either flyers or Pathfinder, maybe you don't care so much about that, but just remember, in invade, the only thing that matters is at the end of the game, last turn, having a higher unit strength on your opponent's half of the table than they have on yours. Quick little note for you, do not come back across the table to necessarily chase after an opponent's unit to rout it, because if you rout it, good, but if you're not completely back on your half of the table, that unit you just used to rout one of your opponent's units doesn't count for scoring. as I said earlier, table halves. That's all that matters. The next thing we're going to talk about here is we're going to talk about the eliminate scenario. Now, in the eliminate scenario, what you would have is you could have a similar table setup, except you would get rid of both of those tokens on the outer edges. You only have one objective marker in the very center of the table. That's going to be worth 2 victory points. And then you and your opponent both assign you put a token, a bounty token, on your 3 most expensive units. Now, if you are able to route your opponent's, if you're able to route one of those 3 tokens from your opponent, if you route it by shooting at the unit, it's worth 1 victory point. If you're able to route that unit by melee hand-to-hand combat, it's worth 2 victory point units. So if you're going to play the eliminate scenario, it really is in your best advantage to be able to take your best interest to take advantage of the center token. If you can move units in to be able to grab that and hold on to that objective marker. And remember, to hold an objective marker, you have to have the highest unit strength within 3 inches of it. So if you can hold that objective marker and then take out some of your opponent's other units, their bounty tokens. Now, the only thing you get scoring for here is for the bounty tokens as far as the victory points for winning. So that's going to be the eliminate scenario. Push scenario. The way that works, we basically would be using this same table layout, but we'd only have, once again, the center token, and it's actually a token this time. It can be picked up, and then you and your opponent, you roll off for sides, you set up as normal, and then you roll a D3, okay? Whatever that number is, that's how many additional tokens both you and your opponent get, and you take turns placing those tokens. Now, those tokens can be placed anywhere in your deployment area, okay? They can be placed in your, they can be put on top of one whole, they can all be put on one unit, or you can spread them out, or you can just put them in your deployment zone someplace to try to keep your opponent from getting to those and just go after and try to get his. Now, the way these tokens work is if you're controlling one of your tokens and you're on your half of the table, it's worth 1 victory point. If the unit holding that token gets across the center line and is 100% on your opponent's half of the table, that token is worth 2 victory points. Now, in this, as far as the push scenario goes, one thing to keep in mind here, you do not really want to have to deal with trying to chase down all your opponent's other tokens. So basically, let's say you roll the maximum 3. In theory, you could put all 3 of those tokens on one of your units, okay? And you could just set your house up, like let's say you were on the side of the screen closest to the bottom, and you could march right across, and as long as you were able to get that center token and get across the table, you would beat your opponent. You don't really care about the tokens your opponent has, because as long as you have, even if you didn't put all 3 on one, however you spread it out, as long as you get that center token, you're at a higher token count. And then if you just have 1 or 2 of your units across the table half, you're going to win. A couple of tactics for this that people do, especially if you have more drops than your opponent. In this particular instance, like let's say you set your army up in the right-hand side, or kind of central, but more to the right, you could then place your last units on the far left of the screen, okay, and put your tokens on, or put, when it comes time to put your tokens, you put all your tokens on that unit on the far side of the screen. Well, if your opponent's matched you drop for drop and they're also going for that center token, you might end up with a clear run across just to be able to zip right across the table. Now remember, you can still at the double, but you cannot fly and you can't be surged, and your movement is maxed out at 5, so maximum of 10 you could go. So keep that in mind for doing. You could either load up all the tokens on one and try to march it across, or you could actually kind of split it up. With that, we're going to use this same screen one more time, and we're going to talk about the secure the field. Now, secure the field is a really interesting scenario. What you do is, after you set up the table and you've chosen sides, you roll off, or actually, whoever won the side, their opponent gets to pick a piece of terrain that is completely on their opponent's half of the table. That's the piece of terrain that their opponent has to defend. After they pick that, then their opponent picks the piece of terrain that's completely on their half of the table. The only stipulation here is the two pieces of terrain have to be more than 12 inches apart. Now, pay close attention to this because people get this part kind of confused. So the way you win here is at the end of the game, you add up the combined unit strength that you have on both terrain pieces. That would be the terrain piece on your opponent's half of the table and the terrain piece on your half of the table. You add up that combined unit strength, and whoever has the total combined unit strength between those two pieces of terrain ends up winning the game. Now, there's all kind of ways to look at this, but let's look at it this way. When you're picking a piece of terrain that you want your opponent to have to defend, if you could pick a piece of terrain that is, like in this particular instance, the person who is on the bottom of your screen, if he picked, like, let's say, the piece of terrain has to be completely in the opponent's half of the table. So if he picked, say, that tower, or he picked, in this particular instance, let's say, the section of the wall that's coming out of the house, because that section of the wall is completely on his opponent's half of the table, well, he's now put his opponent at kind of a disadvantage because, one, if it's that tower, for instance, his opponent can only put units around it. If it's the obstacle, even better yet, because it's got such a small footprint, there's only so many units that he can get on that and get close enough to gain for it. Now, hills, woods, open pieces of difficult terrain, those, it's okay to pick those, but if you pick a piece like that, you're allowing your opponent to be able to stack units on top of or inside the footprint of that piece of terrain they're defending, giving them the opportunity to get a higher unit strength. So that basically is it for Secure the Field. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this was some help to you. Questions, comments, would love to hear them. See you next time. Bye.